Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I speak on the motion and the report itself, I want to pay tribute to Justice Jai Ram Reddy. Mr. Speaker, it is with deep sorrow that we have learned of the death in Auckland last night of Justice Jai Ram Reddy, who twice led the National Federation Party between 1977 and 1999 and served as Fiji's longest-serving leader of the opposition. Mr. Reddy was 85 years old. An accomplished lawyer and brilliant public speaker, Justice Reddy was the acknowledged leader of Fiji's Indo-Fijian community during its most difficult and challenging period after independence. His pursuit of reconciliation and tolerance with Sitiveni Rambuka in the post-1987 coup period led to the groundbreaking 1997 Constitution, cementing him into Fiji's history as one of our most important national leaders. Justice Reddy's, Mr. Speaker, electoral partnership with Mr. Rambuka in 1999 was unsuccessful, rejected by the voters. He then embarked on his next career as a judge, first as president of the Fiji Court of Appeal, and later as a member of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, sitting in judgment on the horrors of the genocide that had taken place in that country. Justice Reddy was a man of his times, but also one who understood and influenced history. From his earliest time in politics, he understood the importance of deep understanding and cooperation between Fiji's two main ethnic communities. He fought hard for his NFP constituents, farmers, workers, and the Indo-Fijian community, but always with an eye on the future. Justice Reddy understood that the security of Indo-Fijians lay in a deeper and more meaningful relationship with Fiji's indigenous people. He worked all his political career to pursue it, often in times of deep division and misunderstanding. Justice Reddy was Attorney General in Dr. Timothy Biman's short-lived government in 1987. Driven from office by the military, he fought passionately to protect those who suffered from the coup and its aftermath. He reluctantly returned to politics in the 1992-1994 elections, but always with a view to bridge, building, and reconciliation. His engagement with Prime Minister Rambuka in that period laid the foundations for a deepening of democracy and cooperation between people of all races and faiths in our country. Mr. Speaker, he was the first Indo-Fijian leader to address the Great Council of Chiefs at Mr. Rambuka's invitation. He travelled with Mr. Rambuka to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London in 1997, where Mr. Rambuka invited him to speak for Fiji in Mr. Rambuka's place. While many around him nursed the 1987 grievances, Justice Reddy understood that it was necessary to move forward, always remembering the past and the lessons it could teach us. The 1999 political partnership between NFP and Mr. Rambuka's SBT did not resonate with voters. They lost that election. The reasons for this are now a part of our history, but this was a lost opportunity, an event that led to the 2000 coup and its consequences. Fiji still feels these consequences today. It was at that point that Mr. Reddy, as he then was, decided that he had served his time in history and chose to return to the law, this time as a judge. Justice Reddy, Mr. Speaker, is a towering figure in Fiji's history. Like NFP's founder leaders, Mr. A.D. Patel and Mr. S.M. Koya, it is remarkable that he is remembered for his time in opposition, not in government. In that way, he proved the importance of leadership and vision over the narrow objects of political contest. He had a vision for the next generation, not for the next election. He was deeply committed to democracy, the rule of law, and the politics of dialogue and cooperation. Because of his leadership, NFP moved with the times to become a party with a national outlook, increasing its representation in the Itoke community and its advocacy of issues important to Fiji's people. Justice Reddy's life is a reminder of what politics and leadership in Fiji should be. We in the NFP are committed to the vision he stood for and to bring back the values he always fought for. We want his work and sacrifice for others to be meaningful and to bear fruit in a generation of leadership. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me talk on the report itself. Mr. Speaker, this is a very significant report in that it deals with the 2018-2019 year, 2019-2020, and 2020-2021. Mr. Speaker, this is a period in which we can reflect on government's economic performance. If you look at the 2018-19 budget, pre-election budget, some of the policies, whether it was the tax policy, whether it was the expenditure policy, the government went berserk. They went on a spending spree. Before an election, essentially, it was a reckless boat buying budget and expenditure. And what we came up with in 2019 was a negative growth. The country's economy, Mr. Speaker, had contracted. There were signs of stress within the economy. Our debts were increasing. Then, Mr. Speaker, we got hit by the COVID pandemic. And when that pandemic hit us, Mr. Speaker, we as a country did not have the fiscal or what we call the budgetary space to deal with the massive issue of loss of income through loss of employment and incomes generally. What stood out at that point in time, Mr. Speaker, in 2020 and 2021, of course, is the role of the remittances. And I've never had any of those guys sitting on the other side actually acknowledge how the remittances played such an important role. Mr. Speaker, they don't understand, Mr. Speaker. They say a lot of things. They know what I meant, you know. Honorable members on the other side. Order. Let me come back to that point, Mr. Speaker. I know they don't like what I'm going to say. No one from that side in Parliament ever acknowledged the role of remittances in 2020 and 2021. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the mismanagement of the economy had put this country into a serious and deep hole.
The honourable member has said that we've never acknowledged. We've acknowledged. So many times. In addition, this is the government that's actually helped get remittance. By getting Fijians overseas. Fijians that these people said are emptying the villages. Why do you talk like that? M-Paisa. This is the government that made it easier for them, for our Fijians overseas to be able to send money back home. I say it because I have relatives overseas who send money back home. Thank you, Honourable.
Thank you. Honorable, you have the floor.
This man who made the point, this man who made the point of order, Mr. Speaker, is, as I said before, he's the worst Minister for Health ever in this country. You know, under his leadership, we have the worst health services in this country today, Mr. Speaker.
I can say many things about you, but I will not. I will not lower my level to your level.
Point I was making, Mr. Speaker, is that our economy had already contracted in 2019. The government was in no position to deal with this massive loss of income through unemployment, through loss of income, small businesses and so forth. So what did help us, Mr. Speaker, and I think the Reserve Bank acknowledges that, is the level of remittances. In 2020, Mr. Speaker, we received about $652 million. In 2021, it was more than 800 million. We received a total of about 1.5 billion, coupled with bonds issued by the Reserve Bank to the tune of about $300 million in 2020, development partners, grants, and drawdown of our external loans, which kept our foreign reserves in place, Mr. Speaker. The point, Mr. Speaker, we are making is that this government, has bragged about its so-called Bainimarama boom before. Now they're talking about a Bula boom. But we all know, Mr. Speaker, that we were in a difficult situation. In fact, Mr. Speaker, let me point this out as well. I mean, they made a big deal. They lied on the other side of this parliament that I was proposing a salary cut for civil servants. They lied. 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 And they continue to lie, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
Point of order. Point of order. It was on the website of NFP that NFP had proposed. You are the leader of NFP. NFP had proposed a 20% pay cut for all civil servants. 35%. 35%. Published on your website. Sit down. I haven't finished. Sir, he's misleading Parliament. His party, of which he is the leader, proposed a 35% pay cut for nurses, for doctors, for lab technicians, for frontliners. And I had to fight tooth and nail. They were calling me to say, is this right? I had to fight tooth and nail and message people to say it wasn't. That this government will never cut their salary. This is this man who's talking here.
I know he's aggrieved by what I said, and I maintain that he's the worst health minister in this country ever. And Mr. Speaker, he continues to lie, and that will come out very soon. But let me say this. This is a country during the crisis where the workers of this country, Mr. Speaker, workers of this country not only help themselves in two ways, by withdrawing their FNPF, but also, Mr. Speaker, they took a pay cut. The civil servants took a pay cut because they had a reduction in the FNPF contribution, employer contribution from 10% to 5%. Plus, because the FNPF that the employers pay is part of the salary, part of the benefits. And if you cut that, you are actually...
Order.
Sir. Mr. Speaker, point of order, Mr. Speaker. Man, he's called me a liar. Minister.
Which man? There's no man here.
Minister for Health.
Hey, there's no man here. Which man?
Honorable Minister for Health has called me a liar, Mr. Speaker.
Not man.
Honorable, just take a seat. There's a first point of order here.
Sir, I just wanted to correct Honorable Prasad. I know he's very much worried about what has happened in the past few weeks, and he's on his feet to try and defend his position. But I'd like to ask him to keep it in control, because by definition, a pay cut means your base salary. You have a base salary, which is your pay. then you have other terms and conditions that are attached to your base salary. The base salary, the pay of all civil servants were not cut at all. He's talking about FNPF contribution. That's not pay. He knows that. There's actually a statutory provision that says that every employer and employee must have a FNPF deduction. That's not pay. That's a FNPF contribution, sir. So please don't mislead Parliament. It's not a cut in pay. I know you're trying to recover some ground because you are on record for saying civil service must get a pay cut, and 10%, it was printed in the Fiji Times. Sir, the other cuts that he also is going about saying it's a pay cut, we did cut. Honourable Gawaka, please keep it, please. What? What? I'm on a point of order. I'm on a point of order.
Sit down, sit down. Sit down. Sit down.
Betul.
There's a point of order being done here. There was another one came up. Now you want to take another one. Just take a seat.
Sir, and then there are other terms and conditions. I'm trying to define the definition of pay. There are what we call rural maritime allowances, and we have meal allowances. They are separate to the basic pay. There was no basic pay cut. The salaries of no civil servants were cut, sir. So he's saying because FNPF was reduced, therefore it's a pay cut. It's not a pay cut, sir. That's all I want to tell Parliament. He should stop misleading Parliament.
Thank you. Honourable Biman Prasad, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. No matter how he tries to define it, the FNPF contribution is part of the benefits for any employees from the employers. And that, Mr. Speaker, was reduced.
Honourable Speaker, this is the third time he's called us guys. That's okay. If he calls us guys, he must take what whole 27 of us are going to call him after this. Thank you.
You have the floor.
I know, Mr. Speaker, the fortunes are down. It's going down further, and they are struggling to remain relevant. And of course, the political fortunes is on the line, and I can see the frustration on their part, and they can't accept the fact that all the employees of this country, including the civil servants, had the FNPF contribution reduced. Not only they contributed to the employers, including the government. The biggest beneficiary was the government. They were saving about $4 million as a result of that. But also, Mr. Speaker, the employees took a reduction in their own contribution from 8 to 5%. So during the crisis, not only they were helping government, the civil servants, and other employees, they were not only helping the employers, but they were also helping themselves by taking a reduction from their own contribution of 8% to help themselves during the crisis. They continue to do so. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's about 6.6. They are still contributing 2% out of their salary to themselves and contributing 4% to the employers. It will be 7% and 7% employee contribution and employer contribution from January. Again, Mr. Speaker, they will be taking 1% of the contribution to the FNPF in their pay and continue to subsidize the employers by another 3% because they will still get. What this means, Mr. Speaker, and no country in the world, I think, would have created a situation where employees were helping the employers. This is the only country, I think, where the employees suffered a reduction in the FNPF contribution to help the employers. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to understand that. And no amount of lies and name-calling from the other side will take away the fact that it was the civil servants who helped the government and help themselves during the crisis. That is the fact, Mr. Speaker, and they can't take away that.
Order.
You know,
Order.
and I think it needs to be put on record. I mean, you are laughing, he's laughing, but he knows that the civil servants of this country, help the government in the crisis. They don't acknowledge that. And then they lie that we in the opposition wanted a pay reduction. They keep on lying. After, it was clarified, it was out there in the public, they continue to lie, Mr. Speaker. And this is what they will do. They will continue to lie between now and the election. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all the employees in this country and the civil servants,
Order.
because they, Mr. Speaker, they sacrifice the most in a real difficult situation. Because not only they suffered at the current time, they will suffer for years and years to come, because the savings, including the interest on FNPF, has been lost forever, Mr. Speaker. Lost forever. And that is the reality, and that is the result of bad economic management by this government before the COVID crisis. And I pointed that out, that 2019 we had negative growth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.